I think your experience of beginning to see through the looking glass of the real Tesla, it sounds like is actually a lot earlier in time than most people who are part of Tesla Q Twitter.
The Tesla Q podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended for and should not be used as financial, investment, or trading advice. Research associated with fiscal decisions should be conducted elsewhere. The host of the show possesses no license or credentials to warrant accepting advice based on what is heard on the Tesla Q podcast. Additionally, even though the host and guests may hold positions in companies discussed on the show, they don't have insights into the next time step of the simulation. Therefore, do not make any financial decisions based on the contents of this podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode number 63 of the Tesla Q podcast. As always, if you'd like to be a contributor, you can go to patreon.com/TeslaQ podcast and make monthly contributions. And if you'd like some shorty merchandise, you can go to evacuationboy.com and find some nice coffee mugs. Today's episode is going to be an interview with Matthew Klippenstein, who wrote a somewhat seminal article about Tesla, about their entering whistleblower hell. As Elon Musk has said many times, Tesla went through production hell and then delivery hell. So Matthew, with his article, just adopted Elon's own verbiage and called it whistleblower hell. So that's part of why we're going to talk with him today. But he also has a lot of other experience, particularly with fuel cells. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Matthew.
Howdy. Thanks for having me, TQ.
And would you prefer Matt or Matthew?
Either's fine. Just to clarify, I'm not Ken. Someone's asked me that already. That's my more famous cousin.
All right. So we'll call you either Matt or Matthew and not Ken. So starting from the top, what's some of your background as a professional?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a chemical engineer by profession. I've worked broadly in the clean tech field for the past 20 years, done about 13 years, maybe 15 years in fuel cells in various points, a couple years in wind and solar consulting. I did also about a year and a half helping with electric vehicle infrastructure outreach for a nonprofit, and now do some consulting on both sides of the battery and fuel cell zero emission transportation side. So that's where my technical background comes. Being an engineer, I initially saw some of the or heard some of the stuff that Tesla was doing. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then giving it more thought or learning more about it, it's like, that's the opposite of engineering. It's, I guess, maybe one seminal article that I read that initially impressed me was something about how SpaceX would do launches where, with certain parts, they would have, space accredited or space certified components. We'll just say doorknobs for now, just for simplicity. And they were like, well, we can get a lot cheaper doorknobs at Home Depot. So we'll put both of them into a test rocket. If they both work, then we'll just default to the cheaper one. And initially it was like, yeah, it's pretty cool. But on second thought, that's the opposite of engineering, because that is literally trial and error. That is like that on its own explains SpaceX being able to explode and fail more rockets than the entirety of all their competition combined. And if you were to properly do a cost reduction analysis, you would have to determine what are the forces on this doorknob. What are the strains, the edge cases, if you will, or the tails testing, as we might call it. And then you'd actually be able to determine, you'd model, first of all, can a regular doorknob handle it? Whereas, again, rereading this SpaceX article a little bit afterwards, I was like, that is the opposite of engineering. So yeah, some engineering background, highly idealistic. I'd probably be the most democratic, socialist, far left person you would expect to interview or expect to find in a Tesla Q or Tesla Q adjacent kind of scenario. I'd say Tesla Q adjacent because although I've monitored the company since about 2012 or so, I was the first person to write about electric cars in Canada, just as a hobby blog. I've never been short the stock. I actually did own one share for a period of about a few weeks in 2018 because this was the time when there was a shareholder vote to do more supervision over Elon Musk, and it preceded his calling Vern Unsworth a pedophile by a few months. Like it was, and I was like, well, I can't honestly stand back and just do utterly nothing. So I'll satisfy my moral sense by just symbolically getting a share so I could vote and not say I was a complete passenger or onlooker to this train wreck. But so yeah, like apart from that though, having spoken with legit journalists, I learned that it's kind of like the worst thing in the world to invest in companies you write about, because that puts you into a completely different category. So apart from that one effort to tell myself I didn't do absolutely nothing, then I've not been involved in the stock. I was actually, and this goes back well before like electric.co and stuff. I picked up Tesla vehicle registration data for Canada through the National Advocacy Group. And this would have been, I think, in mid 2013 or so. And so I put together a little article. I contacted IHS, who are the providers of data, and they never got back to me. But that was basically the first time anyone had ever put vehicle registration, monthly vehicle registration data onto a public forum, because until then, everything for the states was still guesswork and not, actual published registration figures. So that's my little, 15 seconds of fame, as it were.
That's something that gets done very, very frequently now, especially with the EU-EVs.com site, which collects data from Spain, the Netherlands, and Norway, which I got many replies from Tesla bulls today after I tweeted a Tesla chart about market share in those three countries. So
right.
Just for full disclosure, I am currently short Tesla. Shocking, I'm sure. I'll be completely honest about my positions. I'm short Tesla. I have put spread position. It's a May expiration, $480 $430 put spread. So I own the 480 and I sold the 430. So if when that expires in May, if the price of the shares is below 430, I'll get $5,000 per contract that I sold of that, or that I bought of that, I should say. So I should be able to. My plan is to hold it until then, because I expect that the share price will continue going down, especially after yesterday when the bump from the quarter one deliveries faded. So I am an official Tesla short,
right.
And just want to get that out of the way here.
Sure, yeah, totally.
So back to the interview. So you're an engineer, but you also are a writer now. You said real journalist earlier. So how did you start writing, and why would you say real journalist? Are you implying that you are not a real journalist?
Oh, absolutely. I'm implying that. I just call myself a blogger. I have no journalistic training of any sort. And again, engineering background. And while I do my best to write in an effective way about things that matter to me, then I would not dare to put myself on the same kind of a platform or podium as people like Ed Niedermeyer, Laura Kolodny, Dana Hull, Russ Mitchell, a bunch of other guys. There is, I think that the profession of journalism, as it's been explained to me, is far more rigorous than the stuff that I would put out, even though I do put a lot of work into it. But I guess I wouldn't. I guess just like I don't like Elon Musk calling himself, an engineer or pretending to be an epidemiologist. I don't want to oversell my particular skill set. I guess I have enough confidence that the value I can provide doesn't need to be inflated falsely, which is a chronic observation you see with Musk organizations, which is kind of sad, but is the reality of it.
There's definitely a contrast there. So
Mhm.
you see journalists as having a bit of a code of ethics, and engineers also have a code of ethics that if they're a professional engineer, they're supposed to abide by. So any thoughts about that?
Oh yes, yeah. So well, actually, I guess this is a convenient segue. So when I first heard about Tesla, I was like, wow, this is kind of cool, neat company. They managed to go public, and they've got looks like a decent car. I think I hit my peak Tesla fandom in about March 2014, and there had been a couple fires in Tesla Model S's, and the company had put out this press release saying, detailing that it was going to put this like triple layer titanium shield on the underbody to protect the battery. It was going to make this thing available to all existing customers. Your safety comes first, and so on and so forth. And so I thought at that stage it was definitely I reached my plateau of peak positivity towards Tesla, because like all the messaging was right there, right? It seemed it seemed legit. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I hadn't looked enough to see the various warts and other things emerging yet. And the first cracks in my fandom came in August 2014. There was an article on Bloomberg. It was about the clash of cultures at Tesla and Toyota. And there was a paragraph in that article which basically said that when Tesla was doing the system for Toyota's electric RAV4, all electric vehicle, used the NCA, battery chemistry and so forth. Toyota said, Tesla, you've got to put in a battery shield on the bottom in case of punctures. And Tesla said, no, we don't. It's perfectly safe. And then Toyota came back to them and said, no, you're going to do this because we want you to do it. And Tesla came back and said, no, you're nuts. This is overkill. And finally, Toyota said, well, we're going to relieve you of your responsibility for this component. We are going to design it for you, and then you are going to, assemble it onto the vehicle as we specify. And so this aura of Tesla being this very caring for the customer company kind of popped there. This bubble popped because the first time Tesla was making its own vehicle, the RAV4 EV preceded the Model S, Tesla had clearly decided not to go with the battery shield. And then they had a fire due to a puncture of the battery from below in October 2013. And then there was another one, I think, in November, and then it must have taken them a few months to put together the solution. So basically, it wasn't that Tesla was a firefighter putting out the fire. Tesla had been the arsonist who had caused the fire by not putting a proper shielding in place when an existing OEM, with all the existing skill sets you could possibly want to learn from when you want to make your own car company, had pretty much, had very explicitly and forcefully said, no, to keep the customer safe, we need this part. And it's never one thing which shifts your opinion completely, or it's rarely rather. But that was kind of the first bit of snowballing, which led to this gradual avalanche, which caused me to view the company with the utmost skepticism and basically, be in very close alignment with many Tesla Q perceptions of the company, which I hold to be true based on what I can verify myself and from the quality of work that various Tesla Q members put into their analyses. So it's almost like the sort of the height of my enthusiasm for this company, which hit all the right notes for my green, left, progressive, social democrat kind of ideals. The annoyance is, and the hostility maybe, or the disappointment is much greater, because it's like the only person you dislike more than your enemy is like a traitor, someone who
Mm-hmm.
abuses your trust. And so while while I don't short stock or anything, that's not sort of my wheelhouse. It is just appalling to me, uh, as more has been uncovered, just the scope of the wrongdoings that I perceive there to be. So it's funny. I'm probably also the only Tesla Q or Tesla Q adjacent. I'm not short. Uh, Person who's ever written for Clean Technica, which is rather hilarious, and is probably its own little adventure story.
We'll get to that in just a little bit. I should note here that Toyota is the only other auto manufacturer that always had a higher market cap than Tesla throughout the bubble of February of 2020 that Tesla went through.
Right.
And back to the battery shield thing. Am I remembering correctly that the addition of the titanium battery shield was part of why the battery swap became a lot more difficult? And then that gets into the fact that Tesla accepted money from the state of California for demonstrating that the battery swap worked, and then of course they let it die off really quickly after that.
Right.
So what do you remember
Yeah.
about that?
So that is a good segue. So the titanium battery shield. So I'm not 100% sure of the details. I'm sure Ed has covered that. But without a doubt, the titanium battery shield would have made it more difficult to execute any kind of timely swap of batteries. Actually, yeah, Ed's reporting in about June, maybe 2015, was another brick in the wall of disillusionment with Tesla, because again, I could see that, okay, well, if usually you give people a second chance or a third chance if you really have faith in them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so to learn that Tesla had not followed the orders really of an OEM in making its own car, making a battery shield, that was one thing. Then to find out that they were gaming the system from CARB, California Air Resource Board, for an extraordinary lucrative amount of credits, was also quite appalling, because I mean, I'm literally the type of person who tends to support this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason to support this, it would be not unlike if you identify a strategic industry, then okay, there may be some value in providing financial support for that. I would imagine, for example, that manufacturing masks from now on would become a strategic industry in many countries. So, however uneconomic versus Chinese supply, you would keep some level of subsidy to make sure you have some capacity domestically. So I'm totally on board with the idea of societies being able to choose to make subsidies, however expensive they may be. But I'm simultaneously completely opposed to participants so obviously gaming a system for their own individual benefit. And not even in we kind of did game the system a bit, we'll try and avoid that later, but rather Tesla at one point went on to say that CARB wasn't giving out enough credits or wasn't being stringent enough. I was at a conference where one of their representatives excoriated, practically crucified CARB for not being even more basically liberal with credits. And it was one of those. It was again one of these moments where you realize, wow, the emperor has no clothes. This is detached from the reality that you have to be. It's detached from reality. Just nuts. So that works into Ed Niedermeyer's reporting on CARB, which is mid 2015. Late 2015, actually, there was a piece, interestingly enough, in Clean Technica. I think it was like in early November by Zachary Sheehan. I think he's their main guy, the big boss there. And he was writing about Solar City's, it was like My Power or My Home loan program. And to his credit, he said, I'm a Solar City shareholder, this and that. I'm disappointed by this. it turns out that Solar City was offering a loans with 30-year terms for their for people who wanted to acquire solar panel systems, and that if the solar panels didn't produce sufficient electricity or something, they could wind up still owing Solar City money at the end of the 30-year period, which is totally abusive. Like it is excruciating. It is taking advantage of people who are not as financially literate as you, right? And there are reasons to have consumer protections, ideally to protect people from these situations, because no one can possibly be an expert in everything. And that was another one of these tick box where I mean, even Zachary there was mentioned, again to his credit in this case, that he wasn't comfortable with the idea. He gave him kind of a slimy feeling, but he thought, well, if it's for the greater good, then maybe kind of, but I got a bad feeling about this. And I think that really that crystallizes the maybe one difference, because I was just appalled by it. I was very angry when to read this exploitation of people without the financial savvy. And so I was totally happy to say, wow, Solar City, do not trust. And yeah, it was just something that he was already too tied into the mythos, into the narrative, to do what I think he would do if it was the Koch brothers, say, whose solar company was doing something of this sort, right? So so that was another one of these indefinite points where things escalated a bit. And I think at the end of 2015, I did write a piece for Green Car Reports, pulling out owner responses to this Plug-in America survey, and I did a Weibull analysis, kind of a failure prediction analysis standard in engineering, and concluded that within 60,000 miles or so, 2/3 of Tesla drivetrains would be replaced. And that was my first experience with the sort of the probably somewhat astroturfed sort of Tesla support flooding in to defend the queen bee or whatever. And but again, it was another thing where it's like, well, you had all these years to learn how to make this stuff. You had Toyota, not just Toyota, but also Daimler, that you could learn from to design things, to test them, to avoid repair costs. And yet you put this out. I guess by that point, I still thought, well, maybe you can pull it around if you learn from this error and properly budget for things and lag to delay projects to make sure you don't incur repair expenses or goodwill. I think Lewis Carruthers has tracked how those might be used to cut the official warranty numbers. But yeah, it's just I guess that just means that 2015 was a bit of a seminal year, in that you had these big dominoes falling, which just stripped away any pretense of there being something, I don't know, admirable, say, about how the business was being run, something innovative as opposed to just sort of loud and shouting its way to the front of the audience.
I think your experience of beginning to see through the looking glass of the real Tesla, it sounds like, is actually a lot earlier in time than most people who are part of Tesla Q Twitter. My personal foray into Tesla Q, I think, more stems from the Solar City bailout, which of course spawned Tesla charts, and maybe a little bit conspiratorially, maybe not so conspiratorially, I feel like the Model 3 got rushed out a little bit in 2016 as part of the overall narrative of getting the Solar City bailout through. I feel like they had to rush that vehicle design, and the Model 3 and the production hell and delivery hell and all that they've gone through with Model 3, I feel like added the stress that caused the pedo guy tweet and the Montana skeptic doxing, and that was more what pushed me into Tesla Q Twitter. So more from 2016 with the Solar City bailout and things that happened after that. But of course, things that led up to that were already in place, and aspects of the culture were already in place. So
Yeah, I should also note that when I was for in my tenure with the renewables wing of a major engineering consultancy, um, there were projects for which we were trying to reach Solar City slash Tesla to get a hold of power walls and power packs, because I know that there's a lot of skepticism about the economics of wind and solar, but they are quite cheap. And again, it was like, we're talking about one of the larger, not largest, but one of the larger engineering consultancies, and you couldn't get a call back. It was just ridiculous. I even staked out a coffee house once where I knew Tesla had a sort of secret satellite office in a nearby building, and gave my card to one of these guys saying, look, we want to buy a bunch of these batteries for this project. And, you don't hear anything back. Now that was just another indication that it just the inside, it's like lipstick on a pig, I think is the stock term. I suppose the one defining difference, people often compare Elon Musk to Steve Jobs, but there's the famous anecdote about Steve Jobs' adoptive father telling him something about like a carpenter, a good carpenter, does everything right, even the stuff the customer doesn't see. It's like, they properly fashion or do carpentry on components at the back of the dresser or something to that effect. And again, the deeper I've looked, the more consistent it just becomes, ever more consistent, that apart from the surface gloss, everything else is an utter mess. And I do feel great compassion for the people, not the higher rungs of people who have cashed out with gobs of stock options, but the working level people at the company for whom life must be just a basket case gong show, because there's clearly no bother or no discipline about actually executing. Yeah.
And I think a lot of those people that you're referring to have had a pretty crazy last 2 weeks with the
I'm sure,
extension of operation beyond when the orders went into place in Alameda County. And then just yesterday, it was confirmed that people were let go from temporary staffing agencies that were working in Tesla's facilities. So,
right. So, I can understand that every automaker is going to be having many companies, even most companies perhaps, will be having layoffs. So I can kind of understand that. But just again, maybe again coming from the engineering angle, that you have to keep the public safety in mind. It's inconceivable. It's like unforgivable to keep your plant open in the middle of a shelter-in-place order, and again, not only in the sense of, hey, guys, we have, like, if you're a construction crew and the building doesn't have a roof on it, I can see, okay, well, let's finish the roof, because you don't want to have a building without a roof out there for months and months, especially in rainy Vancouver, where I'm from.
mm-hmm.
But the attitude of, well, we're gonna draw on a hodgepodge of phrasing at different levels to say that we're vital and essential, and then that we're gonna. I believe there's one little response which was to the effect of, until we get local, state, federal, and some other agency approval that we are not essential, we're going to keep on running, which is just a callous and very I'm trying to say it, it's not indiscriminate. I'm having a bit of a Biden moment here, you can tell, but just an absolutely atrocious ethics or perspective, just a vile way to look through life.
Mm-hmm.
I again, if it was Coke Industries, I can absolutely imagine these various fan sites howling with outrage. But it's like the promise that, oh, this is being done for green purposes and sustainability and so forth. that's such a powerful allure that it's a red herring that just blinds these other folks with whom I probably share more than most Tesla Q, philosophically than I share with most Tesla Q members. It's such a remarkable bait and switch, and I guess I see it. Several of my other friends do see it as well, but maybe there's this thing where there's this sort of it's like this how you can capture regulatory capture. Then it's kind of a media capture that Tesla has performed, in that anything which is Tesla has become newsworthy. So it gets you clicks, which brings you advertising revenue and maybe mentions in even more prestigious media. And so I think one possible reason, or one of many reasons, that I've been able to become harshly critical of Tesla for objective reasons, while others haven't, is that they kind of depend on Tesla for a lot of their revenue. It's like the remoras attached to a shark, kind of. And there's that I think Upton Sinclair saying that you can't change a person's mind if their paycheck or their next meal depends on them believing the other thing. And so I think the fact that I have this existing engineering consulting career has allowed me to step back and say, wow, this is just such a, there are more red flags here than a communist funeral. It's allowed me that privilege, whereas a lot of people who 7 or 8 years ago I'd have been like, yeah, great guys, have just completely created a Tesla-shaped blind spot, in their perspectives, to allow for their continued existence, because Tesla brings the clicks. It's the big media is fueled by fossil fuel advertising in reverse. It's a perfect inversion of that meme. Now I did actually, so I guess, yeah, we talked about this before. So it's a little bit like in Christian tradition, Jesus gets tempted in the desert, and one of the temptations is the temptation of power, right? It's like, bow down to me, says the devil, says Satan, and then you can rule everything. And I do feel, in a sense, that that's kind of the devil's bargain that some of these clean tech related sites have done. That's changing now. Even electric inside EVs has been more has some critical contributors, let's call it. But the allure of more money and being proximity to power and influence, even if you're just reporting on it, just like you're a courtier at some feudal court in the of European royalty. I think that's kind of I guess there's a deep actual psychological truth in this little bit of the Christian tradition. And then, just because I read religious literature as a hobby from all variety of traditions, I guess the analogy for me would be that there is one school in rabbinical Judaism which says that the rabbi has to have his own 9-to-5 job, because otherwise the rabbi is going to be sucking up to whoever in the congregation at the synagogue has money. And so maybe it has been helpful for me in maintaining my sense of objectivity, or my ability to be vigorously critical of Tesla, that I'm not dependent on articles about Tesla and access to Tesla to actually, make my next paycheck, as it were, right?
And I think there's one particular Wall Street Journal author who is writing a book about Tesla, who I believe may have practiced a little bit of access journalism in that regard. And I'm not talking about Charlie Grant. Charlie Grant does good work. So on that topic that you've just been talking about, I believe you had an article that was published in May of 2018 titled, "What if the Koch brothers were running Tesla into the ground?" So do you want to just talk about that a little bit, that article?
So yeah, definitely. So that is actually that's a fascinating one. That was on Daily Kanban. And so so that came about. So at the time, I had been occasionally co-hosting Clean Technica's podcast. There was kind of I think we had the decent understanding that, oh yeah, Matthew's not really a fan of Tesla, but he likes other clean tech stuff, and so it was fine. And then in that preceding month, maybe I was noting the problems that the Model X had. Was it the Model X? No, this was the Model 3 at this point. Basically, in the third of the three segments for this podcast I recorded with this other fellow, I said, well, look, I know everyone loves Tesla on Clean Technica, but you have to be able to call a spade, because if you keep pretending everything is rosy, then nothing's ever going to improve. The Model X was late. It had these dumb doors. I mean, it had these doors which delayed its progress, which allowed GM to squeeze ahead of the Model 3 with the Chevy Bolt. Basically, so that podcast got shot down. And for each of the podcasts, I put a little bit of an essay together. And the response was that it didn't quite fit the bill of what Clean Technica's listenership was really into, which is it's fair enough. Their site. So I repackaged it. I made it a little bit less generously polite in terms of a little less soft and feathery with the criticism, and then that became the what if the Koch brothers were managing Tesla into the ground, basically. Because if you pull through the number of failures and poor decisions that have been made over the years there, you can't, it's the opposite of what someone who wants a company to be successful would actually do. It's very much short-term thinking, and it's just the most undisciplined and unsustainable sort of a situation. Again, whereas Steve Jobs made sure that to do things right, didn't do everything, but he did things right, or made sure his teams did things right. Tesla has historically relied on pulling an all-nighter, making sure something has a nice little box or a little, the packaging is nice, and then it's a hot mess on the inside with spaghetti code or the hardware equivalent, which is just the opposite of the right way to run a company, and even to an extent, respect your customer, because the customer should have a reason to have confidence that you're going to provide something of comparable quality and durability, made with the same standards as your competition, right? So that was one of the, I think that was the first piece I put on Daily Kanban there, at least under my name. So yes, so that was a bit of a moment. And again, the only reason I actually did that was because I was like, well, everyone who would have reviewed this knows it's me anyway, so I might as well just put my own little stake in the ground.
So you've written. You said you used to write for Clean Technica some. You've written for the Daily Kanban a little bit. Also, the Whistleblower Hell article was on The Drive. So do you want to just talk about some of the different publications that you've written articles for?
Sure. So I did most of my writing at Green Car Reports from about 2013, I guess, on to about 2019 or so. And basically, what I had done is I'd bought a plug-in hybrid myself, ourselves, in 2012, and being curious, I was like, well, who else is buying these? And it turns out that there were a bunch of people who were already compiling sales data for the States. No one was doing it for Canada, and to my great heartache, someone, which is Jose Pontes, was already doing a worldwide count. So he's the EV-volumes guy, or EV-sales at blogspot.com. And so I was like, damn it, if I had this idea 4 years earlier or 3 years earlier, I could have, compiled the database and generated a platform off of that. But, he's a decent guy, so good for him. So as a publication with a very narrow focus, not everything that I wanted to write about was feasible for Green Car Reports, so I did broaden out a bit. Clean Technica did some work with Daily Kanban as well, with the Drive. I also write occasionally for National Observer, which is a general Canadian publication, sort of an online newspaper, which amusingly enough, Grimes' mother is the star journalist for. So
That's pretty
yeah,
funny.
it's a fascinating dance.
Is her last name Boucher also?
No, it's her name is Sandy Garasino. I imagine that's from a subsequent marriage or something
Gotcha.
of that sort.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting pregnancy to watch play out.
Hmm. Yeah, like yeah, it's I do wish uh, them the best as much as I wish anyone and everyone the best ultimately.
Indeed. So I'm gonna shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
Uh, what could you describe your personal investment philosophy, or what you do, what you're doing, retirement savings wise? Do you
Sure. Yeah.
ever
Totally.
invest in individual equities?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I previously said that so I'm kind of your typical Bernie social democrat or democratic socialist, green left kind of a guy. Um, I graduated around in the late '90s, around the dot-com bubble, and so I came into some money around the time that the whole bubble was deflating. So I thought to myself, well, if the tech world is kind of overvalued, what's the absolute opposite? And I was like, I bet you gold. The gold must be the absolute opposite of tech stocks. And so I spent a good part of a decade noodling around various gold type websites, just on the assumption that you couldn't have a bubble and a 20-year bull market without some sort of severe, several year recession. I was kind of wrong on that, but it was an amusing thing, and it exposed me to a lot of libertarian thought, because and a healthy distrust of the Fed, which is hilarious. So you've got like I'm a far left guy who hangs around with probably somewhat conservative folks in Tesla Q, who has a deep knowledge of libertarianism based on hanging around in gold websites in the early 2000s, early aughts. And yeah, it's colorful, I guess. Um, so at the moment, having ridden bubbles up and down somewhat, my main focus was getting our mortgage under control. Live in Vancouver, kind of a hellish place to try to buy property.
Mm-hmm.
But the main focus has been on, I guess you'd say, value investing, or under uh, underpriced. Oh, I guess everyone tries to find underpriced stocks. But basically, unlike many of my friends, for example, I don't see any moral need for divestment. I think the market's at this point going to take care of it. And frankly, if I had a few more zeros to my net worth, I'd seriously consider, renting a tanker and buying $4 a barrel Canadian oil,
Oh,
and then just sitting on it for like a couple months or a couple years. Like,
I was actually just today, as I went for a drive. I'm a terrible person. I traveled this weekend a little bit. We're recording on the 4th of April. But seeing gas prices being as low as they are, I was thinking, what if there was some way to start a company where you as an individual, me as an individual, could buy just gallons and gallons and gallons of gasoline right now at today's prices and lock it in and just get it delivered months and years down the road? Because
right.
I wouldn't mind at current prices. I would lock in about a 10-year supply of my own fuel needs if I could. But yeah, that's just an aside. But
Yeah. So I mean, if you had a farm, you could probably do that, right? Like a lot of farms do have large fuel tanks for
mm-hmm.
their things. Mind you, farms have their own challenges. I do have some farming relatives, and but yeah, it's like if I can't I guess I think you mentioned on your one of your podcasts with Elmer there that you had a position in like metallurgical coal, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, okay, well, fine. If someone has, if someone, some business is in dire strait, like airline stocks, at some point some point they'd recover again. I don't know if it's the bottom now, but there's just no way that people stop flying, especially with rising global incomes and so forth, right? Everyone wants to be able to visit exotic, far-off places. For many people growing up in Asia right now, the exotic, far-off place will be North America, and power to them. It's just a matter of avoiding pollution from their mobility. That actually, I guess, sort of gives a segue into my experience with fuel cells as a complement to batteries. I did have one of my pieces in the drive had this graphic, which actually has been used a few other times, I've noticed, where the difference between batteries and fuel cells is kind of like the difference between exoskeletons for insects, for small creatures, and interior skeletons for vertebrates, larger creatures. Almost all small, tiny creatures, living things which aren't single-celled microorganisms, have exoskeletons because they're very weight and they're very efficient, basically, at the low size, at the small end. Whereas almost all of your large, well, basically every one of your large animals has an interior skeleton, has a vertebrate, is a vertebrate. And so there's a similar kind of an overlap between batteries and fuel cells, in that batteries for electricity are fantastic at for smaller
like a cell phone
vehicles. Yeah, cell phone for small
phone, a laptop,
cars, e-bikes especially, and then at the higher end, like Nikola is a high-profile company wanting to do long-distance trucking, but also for boats, trains, planes. Hydrogen fuel cells are likely to be the result. Passenger cars are kind of a weird one because a battery electric vehicle can provide you all the range and stuff that you need. However, unlike cars are a consumer good, they're not a commodity good. No one ever buys their car based on total cost of ownership. They tend to buy it because they like the look of it, or it has a particular feature they desire, or they're loyal to a brand. And the early data still doesn't show a tremendous willingness, at least outside of Norway, to have everyone shift over into pure batteries. I think there will be a role for fuel cells there. You can say they're inefficient, but every luxury vehicle in the world is cost inefficient relative to, a Prius C, I think, might have one of the lowest total costs of ownership. And so I have tried to avoid writing too much about micromobility, which is e-bikes and things, because I do think those would be, I do have tremendous expectation that is the true disruption in mobility. And I want the ability to tell my investment guy, whatever, to basically buy shares in every public company that has a direction or a means into the e-bike / scooter micromobility market in the next number of years. Now that after some of this fizziness from the everything bubble wears out. Just to go through the mechanics of the whole disruption thing, the disruption technology in disruptive innovations tend to be cheaper, crappier versions of analogs to existing products. And electric vehicles are the opposite of that. They're more expensive. They provide all the services, more or less, except for fast refueling. And they're continuing innovations, not disruptive innovations. And the actual disruptive innovation, which is a lot cheaper and a lot crappier, is literally your e-bike or your scooter, or those little stand-up scooters or the sit-down ones, where you don't have the range. It has a lot less mass, much lower price point, a few $1,000s, and you get wet. Or snowed on. And yet the nature of disruptive innovation is that ultimately people go from the very over-designed, over-engineered solution to a much simpler, lower adequacy version. And so I guess one of my big pictures, since I still would like to write about hydrogen fuel cells and electric vehicles at various points, and not compromise my contributions, I'm not investing in that, although I aim to avoid micromobility because I see a tremendous upside for that. Basically, being the true disruption of the auto sector. Yeah.
On that topic, there's a company that I've only looked at a little bit. I actually did buy some shares, like probably 5 or 6 months ago, and I only held them for a couple days because I bought it right before it spiked up like
Oh wow.
60% or something crazy.
Well done.
But it was Electromechanica. Their
Oh yeah, those
ticker
guys.
symbol is Solo.
Solo. Yeah,
So
that's right.
are you familiar with them as a company?
Yeah, they're actually their North American headquarters is here in Vancouver. They have a
Okay.
little facility. I've seen their chart. It's I guess the one thing I would say in my misadventures in investing is that good companies can be terrible stocks. If the
Mm-hmm.
stock happens to be too high, or or contrarily, bad companies can be terrific stocks.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the example of coal, or because basically everyone's given up coal for dead. Well, if everyone's given it up for dead, then at some point it will seem merely comatose. At which
Mm-hmm.
point you're going to get a price bump, and you can probably make a profit off that. So, with respect to the to Electromechanica, they have a single seat vehicle, which would be which could be very cost effective alternative for people with desires for commuter vehicles.
Yeah, the you mentioned earlier that the micro scooters and stuff, people would get wet. So the Electromechanica vehicle is actually enclosed, so that would get
It
rid of
is.
that part
So
of it.
that is now the challenge is that if you want an e-bike, you're spending maybe a couple $1,000, maybe a few $1,000. Whereas for this Electromechanica Solo, you're still in the range of like $10,000, right? And that's the range of a small 5-seat Nissan Micro, which is, I am told, kind of a terrible car. But my like I do hope that Electromechanica finds niches, and I expect there will be niches where it's a very useful, very an excellent vehicle. Um, my worry would be that for the general public, if I'm thinking I'm a recent college grad or something, I have a very limited amount of money, I might be renting. Then if I'm getting a new vehicle and I'm on a really tight budget, I would probably take a Nissan Micro where I could stuff the back seat with ramen and hot pockets, and then also my wife could sit in the other front seat, rather than get an Electromechanica Solo, which they do have a two-seater they're designing and want to pull out, but um, I think the price point has to be radically different, radically lower from the low end of combustion vehicles to really get that sort of disruptive those disruptive adoption rates. Uh, which again, so uh, I don't pretend to. I know enough about accounting to know that someone who's really good at accounting can trick me.
Mm-hmm.
I do hope that Electromechanica is able to find niches where it can thrive. I don't expect those niches to be too big, but depending on whatever the stock price is at, and I guess the various technical analyses, which will give hints at whether the stock's likely to face further pressure or not, it could still be a lucrative buy if you buy it when people leave it for dead. And again, it merely winds up only comatose.
Mm-hmm. And just a couple quick notes. Electromechanica is either a micro cap or maybe even a nano cap stock. So
Yeah,
it's
it's
a
tiny.
tiny company. So don't go out and buy it, uh, unless you've done your own due diligence elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Another thing about them, I think with the Solo, part of the big selling point is the fact that you could still get a lot of the subsidies,
That's
particularly
correct.
the
Yes.
$7,500 federal income tax subsidy. And in California, there's additional subsidies on top of that. So I think they're targeting the Los Angeles area in particular, and maybe one other metro area as places that they're targeting. So I
Right.
think the pre-tax incentive cost of that is something like 18,000, and then with the tax incentives, it gets down to an effective cost of maybe 7,000 or something.
Oh,
That's a
really?
ballpark.
Sure.
Don't quote me on those numbers, but
Because I by default think in Canadian figures. Yeah. So
yeah.
right. I guess another point about cars being a consumer market is, so in Canada we have this Nissan Micra. It starts at like 99.88 or so Canadian dollars, so about 7,000 US, and it's not even offered in the States, or it wasn't last time I checked, because Americans don't buy small cars.
Yeah, I haven't heard of it.
So again, if anyone was puzzled about this Nissan, this mythical Nissan Micra vehicle, yeah, you don't get in the States. So again, I do hope that businesses are able to flourish. I'm sure there are little pockets where electromechanica can be very competitive. It's just a matter of are those big enough for the company to thrive, and is the price of the stock reflective of what you'd eventually be able to generate from it.
Mm-hmm. And one more point that I want to mention is what you mentioned earlier. The product and the business and the share price are not always going to be in line with each other. They're definitely different things, especially when you throw in the fact that companies have capital structures with debt. A lot of companies have convertible bond issuances, particularly Tesla, as anybody listening to this should well know, and then equity. And there's a hierarchy to those aspects of the capital structure. And the main takeaway that I feel like far too much of the world these days forgets about, or doesn't think about, or doesn't know about, is that equity is risk capital.
Right.
The debt portion of a capital stack gets precedence over equity, and I feel like a lot of what's going on right now with some aspects of the stimulus with the coronavirus is geared far too much to trying to save the equity price, which a company doesn't stop operating because their equity price goes to zero if they have to go through Chapter 11 bankruptcy. That's why Chapter 11 bankruptcy exists. So that's my soapbox, and I'll jump off it now. But product, business, and share price, three totally separate things that you should not conflate to each other. And Tesla fans, I feel like, do conflate those all the time, because they're like, I love this car, it's the best car ever, therefore the share price should be the best share price ever. But no.
Yeah, it's kind of a Dunning-Kruger phenomenon. So Dunning-Kruger is where if you're an expert in one field, you think you're an expert in every field, and God, that so applies in Silicon Valley. I think I'd written. I think this is I'm not sure if it was while I was on my semi-social media hiatus or not, but I think it'll be now the challenge that Tesla has, because its stock almost hit $1,000, is that you've had your parabolic peak, you've had a dead cat bounce, and you are going to go back down, and one day you're going to test that gap at $250 or so, right? I know that much technical analysis. I did actually know a little bit before I started to follow Jin TSEO 09 or whatever.
Mr. Jin.
Yeah, Mr. Jin. Yeah, the fellow in Hungary there. So I am familiar with that, and psychologically, you've got all these retail shareholders like, yes, this is my chance to buy in. It's gone down, and I don't think that the long-term Tesla fans are going to be swamped by the number of new purchasers who will see themselves down easily, 50%, or that's peak to current price. But I think there is a different dynamic you're going to get with tolerating people's tolerating misbehavior and stunts. If you're making money, it's certainly been true of me, I'm totally willing to throw a blind eye to someone. It's like, yeah, whatever, that's part of the quirkiness. That's what I love about so and so. But if you're down and it really doesn't look like you're ever going to get that money back, then I think that adds another dynamic which Tesla has never had to deal with, because it has floated for years between an established range of 300 and something at the top, and then high 100s at the bottom. So I do think that adds a complicating wrinkle, because now suddenly you have a bunch of guys who are like, yeah, stock price, bro, even though they actually bought way higher than the current stock price, right? So that is another one of these trends, which along with actual factual competition, which is going to pressure Tesla. I guess one analogy I might make is that if you go back to maybe 20 2010 or so, I think Toyota had 65% of the world market for electrified vehicles, which means conventional hybrids. EVs weren't a thing. It would have been foolish for anyone to think that Toyota would stay at 65% of all electrified vehicles, because there's other technologies coming in, other people are starting to commit to electrification, other methods. And so in a similar way, and I think Montana even referenced this on Autoline.tv. I've only listened to part of that podcast there. But if you can't make money when you have a virtual monopoly, if like you have this gift here where you've got this long runway where no one's really paying attention, if a smart company is able to get everything in order, I'm hopeful that Rivian, for example, and Nikola for that matter, are both able to get through this gap with proper engineering discipline, proper processes, proper quality systems. If they're able to do that, then that gap they have while there's not that much competition will allow them to get to a sustainable size and sustain themselves, be successful.
Maybe develop a moat.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, yeah, you have a brand, right? The auto sector is just ferociously difficult, as everyone's going to discover through this next number of months and years. But to have basically a 10-year lead on everyone else, right? The only serious competition for Tesla has come in Europe now, is just getting rolled out, and to squander it. The stock price is high, but there is nothing else healthy about that, right? It's like, Muhammad Ali at, I don't know, 50 or 60 still had that number of championships, but not the same person. I think it would also be an insult to compare Muhammad Ali to someone as ungracious as Elon Musk. But it's just you had this. It's like, dude, and to the fans, this company has had such an opportunity, so many layups, right? It was literally like the Harlem Globetrotters playing against the Washington Generals, I think they're called, the short white guys, and you couldn't put it away. And again, I can't foresee the narrative continuing. Again, now you have all these people who are way down on their investments. I do not have any idea how deep the accounting tricks can get, but in terms of, will a healthy company emerge out of this 10 years from now? Well, I can expect so, but more likely under some sort of toes to hair, head to toe, restructuring of the company into something which has actual, Darwinianly selected proper automotive traits about it.
Some actual sustainability to the company, as opposed to just the veil of it.
Right. It's like right now it has more bark than bite. Ultimately, there's a lot of bark around Tesla, and it has done a good job of putting electric vehicles into the mainstream, but that's not the end game, right? It's it is not at all well positioned for that.
Back to your analogy of the exoskeleton versus skeletal systems and different sizes of organisms compared to different technologies being applicable to different transportation systems. I'm going to disclose that I am, in fact, a shareholder of VTIQ, which is going to become NKLA as Nikola is going public. And I bought my first shares of that within 2 or 3 minutes of seeing that was going to occur, because I've been following Nikola for quite some time, and I personally find their CEO to be credible and have much more sound attitudes about things than Elon Musk, in my opinion. There is the aspect of him. He bought a really nice house and ranch, which causes a degree of skepticism, and I do plan to hold a degree of skepticism towards Nikola, as they are pre-revenue still. So, but I should say that I am long Nikola. I think they have a chance to really do some good things with their fuel cell vehicles. So with your background, Matthew, with fuel cells, what are your opinions about Nikola and their plan for Class 8 trucks?
Sure, yeah. So Class 8 trucks are the semi trucks, tractor trailers. It is the long haul trucking in particular is something which is just the physics make it infeasible for batteries. It's not just the physics of the weight of the battery cripples your payload, but it's a matter of are you going to have are you going to bring in gobs of power to these remote rural locations in between truck stops, basically. And so there is basically the physics, like that endoskeleton, interior skeleton versus exoskeleton, definitely favor fuel cells for that. I do think that Nikola has at least shown the right approach in that it's partnered with Ryder, a large trucking firm, trucking logistics, things of that sort. It's fuel cell stacks. They don't want to. They want to call them just Nikola stacks. Although I think the expectation is that right now they're using a Bosch stack, which comes from PowerCell, ultimately a little fuel cell company out of Sweden, which was a spin out of Volvo's fuel cell work. But I expect that they'd be working on their own internally developed stack. I have some former colleagues who have wound up at Nikola over there in Arizona, I suppose it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the advantage is that they have partnered with legit companies and have given themselves the best shot to make, basically learn the disciplines to evolve. Like I guess if you make an animal analogy, it's like you need to have complex animals have various organs which specialize in food processing and stuff like that.
Kidneys.
Yeah, kidneys. You got your lungs, you got your heart, all these other things. And so I think they've got a constellation of partners who should be able to show them how to do things properly if they choose to. It does look like they are doing a lot of testing. They do have a few fuel cell trucks that are going between routes, collecting miles, collecting experience, which is very important because Class 8 trucking is very much a TCO driven, total cost of ownership driven business. It's a commodity business. It's not a consumer business in large part. It was interesting to me that they announced plans to launch a pickup truck as well. That makes me worry a little bit at the amount of focus that you have, because that's kind of that's like, it's not as easy a product line extension, right? It's kind of somewhat different. The plan to make battery electric Class 8 trucks for within city deliveries, that makes a lot more sense, because it's basically the same product. You're just you're scooping out a bunch of batteries and putting in a fuel cell with some hydrogen tanks. That is something they announced the factory at Ulm, which I think that I actually visited Ulm as part of earlier in my career. Probably not the same exact business park, but
what country is that?
Ulm is in Germany.
Ulm, Germany. Okay.
Ulm, yeah. So it's Daimler has Daimler-Benz has some factories over there. It's kind of one of their nodes. So I'm hopeful for them, but I think the real things that I'm looking for are the evidence of the rigorous testing and the basically, the accumulation of miles and the tails testing with respect to what are how are you going to make sure that you've designed something which will actually function for clients? Whereas, again, to use the Tesla example, everything is made and tested and designed for California, which is irresponsible. And so, Rivian as well has had some postings about doing winter testing for its trucks. So I am hopeful that the disciplines that are required do get transferred into Nikola. They seem to be saying the right things, so one hopes that that continues.
And I'll just add that there were some pictures over the last 3 to 4 weeks of the Tesla Semi apparently got trucked up to Alaska for some cold weather testing. Not sure if it was a single truck that got rewrapped while it was up there, or if it was two separate trucks. I'm still not fully convinced that they've built a third and fourth prototype Tesla Semi, just because I've seen pictures of the exact same two over and over again, the matte black one and the silver one, and they wrapped one of the two of those in a red vinyl wrap at some point.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, it was.
But the point you made about the fact that Nikola has a lot of partnerships with a lot of very legit companies, like they've already demonstrated that they delivered some beer with Anheuser-Busch. But the fact that they actually have all these partnerships with legit companies is a bit of a stark contrast with Tesla and their propensity to say that vertical integration is the end-all be-all of everything, which SpaceX also does a lot of that, it seems like.
Yeah, I think maybe it was Phoenix 10 in one of the earlier episodes was like Musk has some sort of an inability to accept that other people can overrule him, right? That's probably why he was so angry at so when Toyota ordered the design, the Shield, so the first fire in a Tesla vehicle was in early October 2013. I can imagine that within a couple days or weeks, some unlucky Tesla engineer had to give the answer that it looks like Toyota was right. We do need this battery shield. And so then what happens on October 22nd, 2013, Musk comes out and says fuel cells are bullshit, right? It's this total passive aggressive, like, I can't bear the thought that Toyota was right. Yeah, well, he said that, fuel cell, I've heard that taunt for decades, but it was like, fuel cells are bullshit. And it's just like, he was dissing Bill Gates on Twitter on a Monday, I forget what week it was, but the very previous Friday, it was like, Bill Gates is rumored to be the buyer of this fuel cell super yacht. Or I
remember seeing that. That was about 2 months ago or so.
And he said, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't know much about AI, which was a comment made a few days after Mark Zuckerberg kind of was critical of SpaceX for the reason that SpaceX blew up a satellite that Facebook was counting on for remote internet access, right? So it's I just see that Musk is this terrifically insecure person who knows he's a fraud, at least. Who knows he's a fraud on multiple levels, and has to somehow stamp out or rage against any evidence that to this reality. Also, with his compulsive inserting himself into crises or into humanitarian efforts, it's like he has a Tinkerbell complex. If people don't believe in me as the wonderful hero, part of me dies, or part of his ego most certainly. So knowing how he has attempted to get publicity in such an unethical way for doing very little, if anything. He got himself a little thank you from the Thai government, despite not actually participating in that rescue. I can only imagine how much it would have angered him in the New York Times article, I think about 10 years ago, where he was complaining about not being accepted or not being listed as one of Tesla's founders, right? And I can only imagine that I think the first Iron Man movie came out in 2008, and it was very clear that Tony Stark was based off of Larry Ellison. But by the time Iron Man 2 came out, he was based on Elon Musk. And I can only imagine the amount of lobbying or pressure or haranguing or nagging that he would have orchestrated to get himself made as, you should consider me as a template, because I'm a much more Tony Stark guy than Larry Ellison. And so it's just this Tinkerbell thing where he seems to, part of him dies if he's not regarded as this heroic cult figure. And it's just a very brittle thing. It's like ceramics. They're hard on the outside, but once you crack them, they just completely break.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas metals are more ductile. You can bend and stretch them somewhat without catastrophic failure, unless you do things which are completely reckless and irresponsible, as SpaceX has repeatedly demonstrated. Again,
just this week again, I think the SN4 I think broke again.
that's right. So again, I have no horse in the race between SpaceX or I think Boeing's United Launch Alliance and Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' company, but I can't see SpaceX being sustainable when you have proper disciplines and proper processes at ULA and especially at Blue Origin, which has had repeated success putting up reusable flights for its rockets. Admittedly, not nearly as far into the atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
but if you can do it, it's so much easier to go from going 100 miles in the atmosphere reusable than extending that somewhat, than to try and basically shoot the moon essentially, all at once with no actual theory and modeling done beforehand to confirm that you can actually do it.
And just as to throw a little financial opinion based on some facts here, Blue Origin's finances are much more sustainable than SpaceX. Jeff Bezos has his plan to sell, I think it's either $1 billion or $2 billion of Amazon stock every year to fund Blue Origin. So that he's got plenty of money. Amazon's share price has held up far better than most companies in this virus situation. Right. And I would anticipate that continues. Whereas SpaceX has to continually go issue new equity for capital raises. So it's a big dichotomy there between those two companies.
Right. Well, yeah, and you can tell that I think in a few tweets Musk has commented at how much that frustrates him, or at least it soaks through, it seeps through his words. Again, being on the left, I think that Jeff Bezos is a terrible human being. He's forcing a Blue Origin staff in Washington to go down to Texas for some additional testing to be done. But I have the utmost respect for the fact that he runs an efficient organization, right? Mm-hmm. I have to take him seriously because he is generally going to get done what he promises to get done. And Musk is a lot like Trump in that he's got a lot of bluster, but he doesn't carry through. It's again, if Jeff Bezos Bezos actually through Amazon has a stake in Rivian, mm-hmm. the electric truck company,
100,000 order too.
Yeah. He put a commitment in. I mean, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that one, but it does buy them a lot of publicity mm-hmm. to aim away from treatment of humans. But still, I have a good degree of confidence that Jeff Bezos and his proxies will make sure that Rivian is up to snuff. And if it isn't, they'll yank out the CEO or other senior executives and put in place competent people. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is that, if Elon Musk has to be the smartest person in a bunch, everyone else smart leaves, and you become, the tallest person. It's like, I'm by no means an NBA player, but if I'm playing a team of Tyrion Lannisters, yeah, I look smart. And if you're unable to acknowledge and defer to the authority of others, then you get like this North Korean kind of situation where it's just the worst of worlds. Mm-hmm. For a while, stock price, bro. Yeah, Tesla looks impressive, but under the surface, it's a hell of a mess from every angle I can see. And I have the absolute compassion and sympathy for the people who are struggling under that system, because it shouldn't have to be that way for them.
And on the topic of Bezos and Musk, I'll just throw out real quickly that Bezos, with his annual planned sales of Amazon shares, has to pay capital gains tax on those sales to the federal government. So he's paying taxes to the U.S. government, whereas Elon Musk, who funds his lifestyle by taking out margin loans against his holdings in Tesla particularly, but also SpaceX presumably does not have to pay taxes or does not pay taxes into the U.S. coffers. So that's a big difference between the two of them as well. So
that's right. Yeah, I mean, I would also argue that I'm pretty sure that Amazon's strategy of not being profitable also helps them, because you can't can't get profits off of you can't pay taxes on profits if you don't show any. Actually, one cute thing, and this actually plays to some of the more conservative skepticism about renewable energy incentives. The U.S. has a production tax credit and investment tax credit for companies who put up wind farms. And so what that allows you to do is write off basically take in the wind case, you can get a tax credit for like a couple cents per kilowatt hour, whatever it is, for all the electricity generated by a wind farm for a period of 10 years. It's a phenomenally wonderful way of reducing your tax burden if you are a phenomenally profitable company. So even now, I happen to think it's an acceptable trade-off to get the more wind and more solar out there, since the U.S. grid has a lot of fossil fuels in it. But I recognize that the side effect of this is that, the wind industry is literally one of the reasons that J.P. Morgan has not paid taxes for years, because when a wind project developer wants to get their project developed, it usually has to go through J.P. Morgan, because they're about the only ones who can figure out this obscure and fanatically complicated legislation. J.P. Morgan, as its cut, takes the credit, and then the wind farm developer gets to keep whatever the value is of the wind farm and the electric revenues. In a similar way, solar, generally it's been solar, but also wind, help Amazon, Google, Microsoft, all these other titans look good and green, while it helps keeps their taxes negligible. So again, I recognize the complicated mess of a situation that incentives and subsidies can create, but it's always case by case. Several years ago, I might have said, okay, it doesn't look, I guess maybe in 2014, early 2015, I'd be like, yeah, it looks kind of dodgy what Tesla's doing here, but it is kind of helping the electric vehicle market along. It's only a few cases here where there are these abuses, and just the weight of the evidence just moved me far from even that level of hesitant generosity. So yeah.
All right. Well, we're closing in on an hour and a half almost, so we'll have one final topic, I guess, to cover, and that's that's your article that you wrote. I believe it was July or August of 2019, about Tesla entering whistleblower hell. So, the guy that I've interviewed twice on the podcast, Carl Hansen, was one of the main people that you talked about in that article. So, just tell us about how you came about writing that article and the process you went through, and summarize the article, I guess. As
Sure. So that article has a very interesting story, because it started off. It was actually originally intended to be for the National Observer, again, general purpose Canadian publication, because there were these cases of paint defects in early Model 3s. Why? Because Tesla skimped out on doing proper painting and chose to basically, they put their customer last, as they so often do. And so there was something like 4% of all early Tesla Model 3 owners within 9 months of release of product into Canada had these paint problems. And so I initially pitched the story, and the stuff about the dodgy things going on in Nevada was intended to be kind of a second paragraph or second portion of that 800-word article. And there was some editorial turnover, people getting switched around at National Observer, and so it kind of fell by the wayside. So I thought, okay, well, maybe it's suitable for the drive. And then I was fortunate enough to be able to get in touch with Carl, as a result of which it was like, well, this is kind of the bigger story. And the thing that was fortunate was that I was trying to piece things together, but there was no there was no real written, there wasn't that much of a written record that I could draw on. However, around that time, the legal filing came out, the whistleblower,
the Sarbanes-Oxley suit.
That's right. Yeah. So I think I obtained a copy of that through Plainsight ultimately, because it went promptly up on there. And so that was a really a good catalyst, because suddenly I had material I could work with without having to stick handle through Tesla's non-responsive PR. And so what I was able to do then is, with a little bit of the background work and trying to check with Carl and trying to make sure that, again, as a complete amateur, I'm still being as accurate as possible. I was able to pull from the PDF, from the filing, and then put the article together. I did have a fascinating adventure with one of Tesla's PR people over the phone, with which I compared notes with someone from Reveal News, and eventually that did go forward. But yeah, it was like The Hobbit. It was like a long and unexpected journey, because again, it was supposed to start off with the Quebec paint problems, and then it resulted in a completely different publication with a completely different focus. But it, I think, is a even more urgent piece of information that needed to be made public, because, you know, skimping on your customers, it does happen in the real world, but persecution of whistleblowers is just absolutely abhorrent. It's vile, it's wrong, it's evil. And so yeah, I was I guess I felt I had the privilege of trying to convey the Carl's experience in a manner which hopefully my amateurishness did not get in the way of.
And just a few of the other whistleblowers in the Tesla story, and some quick updates. I saw that there was a filing for summary judgment in the Martin Tripp case earlier this week. I think the really, really condensed version is that I believe Martin's lawyers were requesting that only the salary that Martin got from the period of late May 2018 through whenever he was fired in June of 2018 was the only money that Tesla should be able to pursue, because part of their claims were based on the share price movement in like a 30-minute period from the time the articles written were published and when the market closed on those days. And according to the filing, there was not a whole lot of basis behind that. Christina Balan, who's also been on the podcast here, she had some kind of filing earlier this week where it sounds like Tesla's lawyers changed something up, and her filings were going to have to get changed somewhat. And also she apparently has had some COVID-19 symptoms, so she may have been going through this virus over these last few weeks. So my skeptical fear is that Tesla may have seen her tweets about that and decided very just evilly to try to make her legal burden more in this time when she's fighting this virus, which is just egregiously evil, for no better way to say it. Carl recently got some new representation as of a month or two ago in his Sarbanes-Oxley suit, and Pac Watson, the nurse, was on Tesla's Tesla Chart's Chartcast just a week or so ago. So number of whistleblowers in the land of Tesla. Right. So
yeah, it's I think, and if it wasn't Elon Musk, it would be someone else within Silicon Valley. But it's really I get the impression that it's like a North American Mohammed bin Salman, you know, someone with extraordinary power who has no compunction against using it against anyone who opposes them, on, you know, relying or banking on no one else being able to to coalesce together to confront and to defang him, really. So yeah, it's I guess this is why I think billionaires should never exist. But again, that's a topic for probably a different podcast.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with that, though. There's a special kind of I guess, narcissism, for lack of a better word, that is necessary to create some of these companies that end up growing to such a size, but to feel like you deserve to own that much equity in these companies, maybe. I don't know. I lean towards the capitalist side of things a lot more, but I can definitely see I can see both sides of things. I like to think that I'm pretty close to the middle, but
right. Yeah, I guess as a I guess I'm probably characterized as a democratic socialist. I'm totally fine with people getting fantastically rich. I just like to tax them heavily so that you don't get these a plutocracy or extended aristocracy ongoing for generations. Anyway, it's again topic for a different podcast, but it's just demonstrative how the actions that Tesla through Elon Musk through Tesla has taken actually unite people with nothing in common and everything in opposition about the offensiveness of the actions too.
I think the key is just seeing through the looking glass that first time, and from that point forward, almost every action that Elon Musk takes, you see that there's some ulterior motives behind his actions. So I think we've talked for quite a long time. So before we wrap up, are there any last topics you want to hit on and cover?
Not too much. No, I'm good. I'll probably be paged by my family to rejoin them in physical distancing soon. But or anyway, I guess that's the opposite of it, isn't it? I'm off in the room alone. Anyway.
All right. Well, appreciate you joining us. And this has been episode number 63 of the Tesla Q podcast. If you want to be a patron, go to patreon.com/TeslaQ podcast. And if you want some merchandise, go to evacuationboy.com and get a nice coffee mug. Thanks for listening, and bye-bye.
Bye.